Energy is linked to development. We have already stated this hypothesis and we have discussed it from many perspectives. Furthermore, we have deepened the topic of energy all along the course. So we may say that now we are quite familiar to it. But if we ask ourselves, what is development? I guess we may have some difficulties in expressing this concept. Let's deep it a bit. Right after the two world wars, the idea that intergovernmental organization may help stability and development started taking place. The social and economic growth in less developed areas was indeed seen as an essential factor for the overall development to keep peace and prosperity, and a specific responsibility for the international community. They recognize the duty, but they can see it also as a political tool. The states decided to cooperate at the end of the two world wars for a simple and straightforward reason. We need to grant peace for keeping global stability, and peace can exist only when and if democracy and human rights are guaranteed. To meet these needs, the Organization of the United Nations was launched in 1945, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was shared and signed in 1948. Today, after more than half a century, if we look around, we see that in the above-mentioned reasoning, linking peace, stability, democracy and human rights, probably something was missing, since we still have a number of countries struggled by injustice, oppression and misery. And the missing ring was development. Poverty is no longer perceived as a lack of money, but more and more as a lack of opportunities that prevent human and social progress. This is coherent with the updated definition of poverty given by the UNDP, which goes beyond the economic dimension of development. Indeed, from one side, we do not need to overestimate the power of the economic dimension due to some paradoxes generated by it. The growth of national GDP have caused concurrent growth of internal inequity in many countries. The non-equitable distribution of resources has led to impressive disparities in the global wealth. Growth of the GDP does not induce a consequent growth of happiness for the people in a given country. On the other side, we should avoid underestimating the power of economic dimension. Even if it is a partial indicator, it can give evidence of a structural economic capacity of a country to solve internal issues, such as the high employment rate, which remains one of the most sensitive issues, especially in countries with high share of youth. In the 50s and 60s, the development dream is the economy of growth. The financial push paradigm relies on the following idea. The only barrier for developing countries is their lack of money, preventing investment. As soon as they could invest in enterprises, infrastructure and education, their economies would grow and their population would become more prosperous. The enthusiasm about this theory was also risen by the success of the Marshall Plan in Europe for the reconstruction, but once applied in developing countries, it failed for the lack of structural capacity at local level. By analyzing the results of the first development decade in the 70s, the UN system discovered that the economic growth in developing countries had not resulted in less poverty or in the reduction of inequality between poor and rich countries. The idea of development comes to state that investments are needed first in human capital via health and education, and then in other sectors, such as agriculture. This is known as the socio-economical paradigm, and this approach foresees a big role for the state. In the 80s, with the debt crisis, even this last paradigm was proved to fail. The main barriers for development is recognized instead to be in ill macroeconomic policies in developing countries and in tight internal laws that prevent the evolution of the market. Countries should remove strict financial regulation, open up their markets for trade, create internal markets and reduce state bureaucracies. This is the Washington Consensus. Markets could provide health care and education just as well or even better than governments. The dominant policies of these times becomes to be recognized as the free market paradigm, with a minor role for the state. In the 90s, it was recognized that the Washington Consensus could not work without being supported by a solid governance and institutional foundation. Thus, the initial reform was augmented with a series of so-called second-generation reforms that emphasized the role of institution and governance. The period is thus associated with the so-called governance paradigm of development. The evolution of these paradigms and the still critical situation of developing countries is telling us that there is no magic solution for development. Although aid had become popular thanks to the Millennium Development Goals first and then to the just launched Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. What is more in the idea of development today? Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize for Economics, asserts that poverty is mainly exclusion. Exclusion from basic needs, food, health, housing, and more. Poverty is also the lack of capacity and lack of opportunities to develop our own skills and rights, to grow as individuals, as human beings, to take our own future into our own hands. If poverty is exclusion, then development is freedom, as from the title of Sen's book published in 1999, Development as Freedom. So, in the path to development, our aim is clear. Development needs to promote empowerment, request ownership and participation, and implies that people want and need to take control of their destiny. This is the true end of development. Everything else is a means, and we should never confuse ends with means. Now we can understand why we have said since the very beginning of this course that energy, thought crucial for development, it's a means and not an end in itself.